I'm very glad to be describing to you volume 37 of Polin Studies in Polish Jewry. I'm Antony Polonksy, the co-chair of the editorial collegium together with François Guesnet. Until my retirement in 2017, I was a professor of Holocaust Studies at Brandeis University in the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and I'm still the chief historian of the Global Educational Outreach Program at the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw.
My name is François Guesnet, and I teach modern Jewish history at University College London and have the pleasure and privilege to be co-chairing the editorial board of Polin together with Professor Antony Polonksy, and had the great pleasure and privilege to work on this volume 37 with Katrin Steffen, who will take over now.
Hello, thank you. My name is Katrin Steffen, and I work currently as a DAAD Professor of European and Jewish History and Culture at the University of Sussex. And I'm very happy that we are able to put together this volume of Polin, with which we want to address a surprisingly under-researched topic in European Jewish history, namely the interaction and entanglements of Jews living in German-speaking territories with those Jews further east, especially in the Polish lands. And with this much needed focus on Jews living in a central contact zone in the middle of Europe, it is our aim to overcome two tendencies we still meet in the perception of those communities. First, there is still a tendency to view history, and this is not only Jewish history, in a framework set by national territorial boundaries. So to look at German Jewry and Polish Jewry alone, leaving aside the many interactions, influences, and perceptions that have taken place since the Middle Ages. And secondly, we would like to challenge some of the master narratives that for a long time have dominated historiography, namely that Jews from the German lands count as somehow as a model for modernization, education, and upward mobility in Jewish history, for which they nevertheless had to pay the price of largely giving up Jewish tradition. I mean, so the narrative goes, while Polish Jewry was seen as either the embodiment of Jewish authenticity or as a symbol of an assumed backwardness. So the volume seeks to challenge those narratives from a transnational perspective, recognizing the many migration processes in Europe from west to east and vice versa, and the traveling goods, concepts, and affiliations that went along. Affiliations influenced as well by traditions in the east as in the west. Also, we want to show that those communities were by no means homogeneous entities. Both in east and west, multiple political, cultural, and religious affiliations were everyday lived experiences. And last but not least, we want to challenge the prevailing Western-oriented modernization paradigm by showing that modernity could mean different things at different times and different places. And this holds true, obviously, also for the European Jewish experience. So now I would like to hand over to my colleague, François Guesnet, who will introduce the first two sections of the volume. François.
Yes. My pleasure, thank you. So the first two sections look, and I also share the beautiful cover of the volume in question. The first two sections cover the period before 1800 and the 19th century. And already these two sections engage with the most important processes of how the Jews in Polish and German lands were engaging with each other. So the perceptions and encounters and interactions between these communities. So if I start, for example, with the understanding of mutual influences, there is one chapter about the impact of Solomon Dubno, an Eastern European maskil who worked with Moses Mendelssohn on the translation of the Pentateuch, a famous case of interaction between Eastern and Central European Jews. But we also have a chapter about the appointment of a German Jew to the rabbinate in Lemberg as a case of the difficult introduction of integrationist and reform orientated positions in Eastern Europe. We have a number of chapters which engage with concrete encounters of Jews from the two areas. For example, one about German Jews in Warsaw around 1800, but also a discussion about the 17th century, famous 17th century satirical song, Eine Beschreibung von Ashkenaz and Polak, which documents or demonstrates how early, despite the many kinship relations and other forms of engagement, prejudice and ideas about each other were already coalescing around negative stereotypes. So a very early example of how these two communities perceived each other. Other chapters for the 19th century also cover the reception of literature, for example, the reception of Schiller in the Polish lands, or the translation of German literature into Yiddish. So a very wide range of topics for the 18th and 19th centuries. And Antony will now introduce to the later periods reflected in the volume.
So the interwar period, the first article deals with the First World War, and it's an examination by Alina Molisak of the very different attitudes which prevailed among German Jews and among the Jews of Eastern Europe towards the war. Among German Jews, by and large, the war was supported. There was very little support for the Russian war aims during the First World War. The second article deals with a specific case of a German Jew who found himself as a result of service in the German army in Lithuania after the First World War, where he was the headmaster of a very successful Jewish Lithuanian gymnasium, a Hebrew gymnasium in Kaunas. The third article, a very interesting one by Alina Klotz, deals with the way in which Polish Yiddish newspapers dealt with the rise of Nazism. This is followed with the way in which the hierarchy of Ostjuden and German Jews was reversed in Palestine, where the East European Jewish settlers felt themselves in a much stronger position than the later German immigrants. And the final article deals with new aspects of the first major action of anti-Jewish violence in Nazi Germany, that which followed the assassination of a German diplomat in Paris by a desperate Jewish youth. The articles on the war also highlight the German and Polish-Jewish interaction. The first deals with the rather painful topic of the fact that a fair number of German Jews were expelled to Poland, forced to resettle in Poland. And in the case of the Warsaw Ghetto, the reaction to their settlement was by and large not that sympathetic or friendly. And this was commented on by one of the diarists of the Warsaw Ghetto, Abraham Levin, who said, "We're like two brothers who have been separated by a long period of absence, and it'll take time before we realize that we really are brothers and that we have much more in common than what divides us." And the final article deals with one of the topics which Jan Grabowski has dealt with. He has accused German historians of overstressing the responsibility of the German people and the Nazis in the mass murder of the Jews, and therefore not placing sufficient stress on the local participation in the mass murder of the Jews. I think the article by Laura Jokusz and Grzegorz Losoliński-Liebe shows that this is not correct. It's perfectly understandable why, certainly from the mid-1960s, German historians should have wanted to stress the importance of widespread support for the mass murder of the Jews, given that previously this was held to be the responsibility only of a small criminal margin of German society. And they also demonstrate that both immediately after the war and in more recent times, German historiography has pointed out in a tactful way, because it don't want to do this in a manner which seems to strengthen anti-Polish and anti-Russian prejudices in Germany, the involvement of local populations in the mass murder of the Jews. And I'll hand over now to Katrin to describe the final section of the volume.
Yes, thank you, Antony. So in section 5, the contributions shed light on a variety of topics that characterized Jewish life after the Holocaust in countries that had now profoundly changed after the war: the new communist Poland, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the GDR. So these contributions focus on the new beginnings of Jewish life, especially in Germany, where many Jews also from Eastern Europe who have found themselves in displaced person camps eventually decided to stay, as news from their homelands in the East were not too encouraging to go back. So they engaged in building up new Jewish life in Germany in East and West. And from those fascinating contributions, we learn a lot about the enduring significance of a distinction between German and East European Jews and their descendants, but as well about changing paradigms, perceptions, and interactions due to generational shifts, and also due to a renewed immigration of Jews from Eastern Europe after 1989 to Germany. Also, this section addresses how Jewish life in both communities is represented in today's societies, shown by the example of the contexts of both Jewish museums in Berlin and Warsaw, and also the much discussed films Ida and Phoenix, which both address the trauma of the Holocaust and the complex experience of Jewish women in the German and Polish post-war societies. The volume then closes with an important example of yet another encounter of German and East European Jewish culture, namely an astonishing educational initiative in Lithuania during the interwar years, the so-called Schwabes Hebrew Gymnasium in Kovno, named after its founding headmaster, the young German academic Moshe Schwabe from Halle, who brought his ideas of a profound humanistic and Jewish education in the Hebrew language to the world of Lithuanian Jews. Okay, now I hand over to François for some concluding words, please.
Yes, thank you, Katrin. I think at this point there's not much more to say than sharing our excitement that Polin now will be published as an academic journal, for which we are extremely grateful to the Littman Library of Jewish Civilization, as well as to Liverpool University Press. And also that we are looking forward to the launch of this volume, which will take place on the 12th of February 2025 at the Embassy of the Republic of Poland, and in cooperation with the Polin Museum Warsaw, which will offer a very appropriate framework to launch this important volume. And we look forward to the various online and in-person panels we will have at this event. I think this concludes our short introduction to this volume, and we very much hope you take the advantage of subscribing to Polin as an academic journal if you are a librarian in a university or research institution, and especially to have this momentous volume, not only with a beautiful cover, but also representing the first issue of Polin being an academic journal. Thank you very much for your attention, and we hope to have you soon as subscribers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.